because they've been very busy. So one of the most significant things that happened is the Second Plenary Council in 1991 that specifically established their focus and their preference on the poor in the Philippines. So that kind of set the tone. But now they also came out with a bunch of pastoral statements in response to the different reproductive health bills that were coming before the 2012 and in response to the 2012 one. So from the period from 91 to 2013, the Philippine bishops came out with a bunch of pastoral statements. So in 1993, they came out with In the Compassion of Jesus, which addressed the AIDS epidemic. In 93, they came out with Save the Family and Live, which was primarily about birth control. Now, here's something that they said that I found really kind of bothersome personally. In the Save the Family and Live pastoral statement, they said, reflect on the quality of love that a woman gives to the family. The womb qualifies as a woman's quality of loving. The womb qualifies as a woman's quality of loving. A little objectifying, right? They also said that children are holy because they are children of the covenant, which meant that children out of wedlock were not holy. Little bothersome. In 2000, they came out with something called That They May Have Life and Have It Abundantly. There, they had explicit opposition to the reproductive health bills, and they specifically targeted Catholic legislators who were supporting those health bills. And the topics of that was divorce, the training of midwives, population control, lesbian and gay rights, same-sex marriage, and they were all lumped together as anti-family. Next slide, please. So their work continued. In 2001, they came out with something called Saving and Strengthening the Filipino Family. And there, they correlated contraception and divorce to eroticism and pornography. In 2003, they came out with something that's pretty self-explanatory. It says, we must reject House Bill 4110, which was on abortion. In 2005, they came out with Hold On to Your Precious Gifts and Karangalan ng Bayan, Pamilya ang Pagmumulan. The integrity of the nation begins with the family. And this was all about population control. In 2008, they came up with Standing Up for the Gospel of Life. Again, they were condemning contraception, but this time they gave some support to women's rights and to childcare because the tenor was starting to change in the Philippines. In 2009, they reiterated the Church's position on the family. In 2010, they came out with On the Government's Revitalized Promotion of Condoms, where they actually wanted the condoms to come with a warning that said this can lead to STDs. And then finally in 2012, right before the Reproductive Health Act of 2012, a few days before the vote, they came out with Contraception is Corruption. They said that contraception corrupts the soul and it will lead to greater crimes against women. And then so what they did was, at that point too, after the bill was passed, they signed on to try to stop it, right, for being unconstitutional. So that's the Catholic bishop's position. Next slide, please. So Father Suico proposed, because it just didn't, it seemed like it's in a deadlock. The bill passed, and then you have the Catholic bishops here touting marriage and family values, all of which makes sense, that it's goodwill, right? It's goodwill. But they're at an impasse. So Father Suico is proposing that rather than continue the conversation the way it's been happening, he said that the debate should be reframed. And let's talk about religious freedom instead. Use that as a frame. as opposed to the frame that's been using. And he did tag the bishops for their position, which infringed on the state's responsibility to take care of everyone, not just the Catholics, right? So they have to take care of the Muslims, they have to take care of the Protestants, they have to take care of the natives. And so what happens when the church is so involved in politics like that, it then becomes all about Catholic values, which is sort of exclusive, right? So what do you do if you're in the position of the state? What do you do? How do you represent everyone? So that's part of the issue. So Father Suika was saying that he wanted to introduce dignity and rights into the discourse about this. He also wanted to make sure that the church could talk about abortion as a violation of dignity and the rights of the unborn, rather than it just being a morally corruptible thing to do, right? He also wanted to be able to talk about abortion and contraception beyond the physical, right? There are social implications to these choices. So he wanted to broaden the discussion and really, take into account some of the things that weren't being taken into account in the position of the bishops. And he wanted reproductive rights as protection for women's capacity to give life. So you see, the point of this frame that he's suggesting is that it becomes a more complicated dialogue, but it's a dialogue rather than, no, this is how it is, no, this is how it is. So we could just keep going on and on and on saying, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, right? So it's kind of crazy. So hopefully this actually takes into effect and then the discussion moves in this direction. We don't have the answers. These are complicated questions, right? We don't have that. There are no easy answers for these things. When you consider the objectives of the state, when you consider the objectives of the church. So, but we have to find a way to dialogue well, right? And we have to find a way to move past just the objectification of women's bodies, right? And when you look at who all is talking about this, is a bunch of men talking about women's bodies, right? So we have to include more women in that conversation. I'm not saying it should just be women, but we have to include more women in that conversation, okay? So next, we move on to our next case study. So now we're talking about women as workers and activists. We're going to talk about Dorothy Day, who Pope Francis actually mentioned in his address to Congress. And here I have a video in the next slide. I hope it works. This is about a 2 or 3 minute video that introduces Dorothy. Figured they did a better job. They would do a better job than I would.
We have sound.
Tanggalin mo na lang yan. Yan yung mahina ba yung laptop na lang.
Picking it up. Not getting the sound ceased.
There's no separation between
Let's start over.
Ano yung microphone niya?
She was long and lean and lanky,
and she was very talented and knew it, and very beautiful and knew it. And I never got the sense that she was ashamed of any of her gifts.
Dorothy's worth arose from the fact that she sacrificed the love of her life. If she embraced the Catholic faith, he'd have nothing more to do with her.
was separation between life and prayer and the ordinary activities of everyday life. And so there was a spiritual and contemplative dimension to all those things, as much as there was to picketing at the White House or sitting in jail.
Non-violence makes the world safe for conflict. You can have conflict, but you don't go to the point of killing. And that was what Dorothy taught.
She had an enormous ability to enter other people's lives, to experience what they experienced, and to come out of it with a great longing that life shouldn't be so hard for so many people. You hear brother is hungry, you feed him. You don't meet him at the door and say, go get out filled. You send him down, feed him. And believe and when. I always consider that the Catholic Church was really God's own and she had her guests, like a many. Dorothy has been a kind of sort of laying background whose perhaps ideas were so advanced that they were not able to be recognized at the moment as perhaps being divinely inspired.
So I hope some of you could hear at least some of that. Dorothy Day, it was the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement.
May sound.
Which set up farmhouses and houses of hospitality for homeless people all around and got them involved in spiritual formation. So she set up these houses all over the U.S. and they're international as well. She's radical. She was a radical. She was the co-founder. So the next 3 slides is just some quotes from some of her writings. I wanted to give you a sense of her spirituality with this, okay? So let me just read this. She talks about the aim and purpose of the Catholic Worker Movement. She says, the vision is this: we are working for a new heaven and a new earth, wherein justice dwelleth. We are trying to say with action, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are working for a Christian social order. This work of ours recognizes the primacy of the spiritual. It's not just a social work. Food for the body is not enough. There must be food for the soul. It is easier to have faith that God will support each house of hospitality and farming commune and supply our needs in the way of food and money to pay bills than it is to keep a strong, hearty, living faith in each individual around us, to see Christ in him. Next slide, please. Here's something, a quote from her when she's condemning. She lived at a time when the hydrogen bomb was being developed. And there was also industrial preparations for nerve gas. So this is what she has to say. It is not so easy to separate the city of God. This is a reference to St. Augustine's book, The City of God. So it's not so easy to separate the city of God and the city of this world. It is all very well to say that we must go to the source of all strength, to drink at the living fountain. Because there's another video. But can we go from that fount of love to a factory where nerve gas and incendiary bombs are being manufactured? When it is said that we disturb people too much by the words pacifism and anarchism, I can only think that people need to be disturbed, that their consciences need to be aroused, that they do indeed need to look into their work and study new techniques of love and poverty and suffering for each other. Of course, the remedies are drastic, but then too the evil is a terrible one, and we are all involved. We are all guilty. And most certainly, we are all going to suffer. The fact that we have the faith that we go to the sacraments is not enough. Next slide, please. She's also a pacifist. Okay? In this quote, she expresses her anguish over what is going on in Vietnam. She says, it's not just Vietnam, it is South Africa, it's Nigeria, the Congo, Indonesia, and all of Latin America. It's not just the pictures of all the women and the children who have been burnt alive in Vietnam, or the men who have been tortured and died. It is not just the headless victims of the war in Colombia. It's not just the words of Cardinal Spellman and Archbishop Hannon. The reference here is they were actually claiming victory for what the U.S. was doing in Vietnam. It is the fact that whether we like it or not, we are Americans. We are warm and fed and secure. We are the nation, the most powerful, the most armed, and we are supplying arms and money to the rest of the world where we are not ourselves fighting. We are eating while there is famine in the world. Pretty challenging words. So that's Dorothy Day. So let's move on to our third case study, Julian of Norwich. So Julian of Norwich was a mystic. So hopefully our sound will work in the next slide. She lived in the 14th century. Let's see.
No, if it will see it works. Otherwise we'll get down.
Jesuit novices have to do as part of their training is work with the poor. And early on, I was asked to work with some poor boys in a school on the Lower East Side of New York City. And when I was down there,
It must be another. There must be another tab.
The autobiography of Dorothy Day.
It must be from a different. It's playing from the earlier video. Can you find that and close it?
Press play.
Yeah. See, right up there, Dorothy Day.
Still Dorothy Day.
Yeah, so you want to close, close Dorothy.
This one here?
No, up in the tab.
There.
Yeah, here.
Here? That's Dorothy
Yeah, so
Day.
you want to close that.
Close down.
Close it.
Oh, it's coming out.
That's still.
And then go to the other tab. Next.
And the next tab is where?
No. Go up to the tab. Up.
This one here?
There you go, yeah. And then.
Play.
Play.
This is the Centre for Julian of Norwich, who was a medieval mystic and anchoress who lived in Norwich a long time ago, 1342 to 1429. Now, she's important for being an anchoress, which means that you live a religious life and live in a small cell at the side of St Julian's Church. Now, she went into the cell because she believed that God had spoken to her and given her 16 visions. When she was a young girl, she actually wished for many things to happen to her, that she would suffer while she was still young, that she would be transported back in time to be at the foot of the cross for the crucifixion. And when she's about 30, it happens. I suppose we'd call it a near-death experience that she has, during which time she has 16